let's take a captivating exploration into the ancient roots of the modern field of psychology. On this voyage, we embark on another journey through time, tracing the origins of psychological concepts and practices to their earliest philosophical and spiritual foundations. Long before the emergence of psychology as a formal scientific discipline, our ancestors grappled with questions of the mind, consciousness, and behavior. Across diverse cultures and civilizations, ancient thinkers developed sophisticated theories and techniques to understand the workings of the human psyche. The roots of psychology can be traced back to ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and India, where philosophers and sages pondered the nature of the self, the mind-body connection, and the dynamics of human behavior. Their insights laid the groundwork for many of the concepts we explore in contemporary psychology. At the heart of these ancient traditions lies the concept of noology, the study of the mind and consciousness. Rooted in philosophical inquiry and spiritual exploration, noology encompasses a wide range of practices aimed at understanding and harnessing the power of the mind. From the teachings of ancient Egyptian priests to the philosophical dialogues of Greek thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, we uncover a wealth of wisdom that continues to inform and inspire modern psychology. Concepts such as introspection, self-awareness, and emotional regulation find their origins in these ancient traditions.
Cognitive psychology is a broad field of study which encompasses how people consciously respond and communicate about information derived from sensory stimuli. This includes such mental functions as perception, attention, memory, thinking, learning, speaking, reasoning, creativity, decision-making, and motivation.
As we delve deeper into the noological origins of psychology, we discover a profound interconnectedness between ancient wisdom and contemporary science. The insights gleaned from millennia of human inquiry offer valuable lessons for navigating the complexities of the modern world and understanding the human experience. On this enlightening journey as we uncover this lost knowledge of the noological origins of psychology, illuminating the timeless wisdom that continues to shape our understanding of the human mind.
Hallucination. Cognition or thinking is said to occur in an ineffable realm known as the mind. But what is the mind? According to a 1913 edition of Webster's Dictionary, the mind is the intellectual or rational faculty in man, the understanding, the intellect, the power that conceives, judges, or reasons. Also the entire spiritual nature, the soul, often in distinction from the body.
Psychology.
In our journey through the noological origins of psychology, the symbols and terms that we have inherited play a crucial role in connecting us with the ancient insights that inform our current understanding. One of the most profound of these symbols is the Greek letter psi, which has become synonymous with the field of psychology.
Psychology has its origins, of course, in philosophy. And philosophy for millennia was basically constructed around finding the mind. And they attempted to find the mind and the metaphysical issues related to mind without much success.
Psi, the 23rd letter of the Greek alphabet, is not only a letter but also a gateway into the world of the psyche, the ancient Greek term for soul or spirit, from which the word psychology derives. The Greeks considered the psyche as the essence of human existence, an invisible force responsible for thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Attribute human behavior and actions to mind and trace the word mind back through the eons, trace it back to the Greeks. Soul is the original word to be used.
In ancient Greek culture, the psyche was thought to be the breath of life, departing from the body at the point of death but continuing its journey thereafter. For the Greeks, understanding the psyche was essential for understanding the self and the universe. Parallel to the psi of psychology is the symbol nu, the 13th letter of the Greek alphabet, representing noology, the study of the mind and consciousness. Like psi, nu is deeply rooted in ancient traditions, derived from the Phoenician letter nun, which symbolizes fish or water, elements often associated with life and knowledge in ancient cultures. In early Greek uses, Homer used nous to signify mental activities of both mortals and immortals, for example, what they really have on their mind as opposed to what they say aloud. It was one of several words related to thought, thinking, and perceiving with the mind.
Used today in modern psychology.
Western thinkers have attempted for centuries to locate the mind and its relationship to being. Frenchman René Descartes provided a simple axiom which linked mental processes to existence. I think, therefore I am. Descartes was a proponent of rationalism, whereby knowledge was obtained through logical analysis of known phenomena. His counterpart was John Locke, a British empiricist who felt the best way to obtain knowledge and learn about the world was from direct observation and experience.
The letter nu, with its value of 50 in the Greek numeral system, resonates through the fields of both mathematics and mysticism, illustrating the ancient connection between numerical systems and philosophical concepts of existence and knowledge. Understanding these symbols helps us appreciate not only their linguistic and numeric significance, but also their metaphorical and philosophical weight in shaping the concepts of mind and consciousness that are at the core of both ancient noology and modern psychology.
The first scientific studies of human neural impulses to sensory stimuli were conducted by physiologist Hermann von Helmholtz, who measured the speed of nerve impulses, paving the way for experimental research of what would become psychological topics. But it was his student, Wilhelm Wundt, who established the first psychology laboratory in Leipzig.
The exploration of the psyche in ancient Greece laid the foundational blocks for modern psychological thought. Their investigations into human behavior, mental disorders, and therapeutic methods echo through time, influencing today's practices and theories. The Greek understanding of psychology was not merely an academic pursuit. It was a comprehensive exploration of human existence, encompassing emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical aspects. This holistic approach is mirrored in the modern noological exploration of the mind, where interdisciplinary methods are increasingly embraced. In the Aristotelian scheme, nous is the basic understanding or awareness that allows human beings to think rationally. In colloquial British English, nous also denotes good sense, which is close to one everyday meaning it had in ancient Greece. The nous performed a role comparable to the modern concept of intuition.
Wundt's discoveries were extended by his student, Edward Titchener, who sought to define the mind by reducing thought processes down to their basic structure, using observers he trained to record their responses and reactions to external physical stimuli. Titchener's psychological research sought to provide answers to three seminal questions. What are the simplest components of conscious processes? What are the laws by which conscious elements are associated? And how are these conscious elements related to physiological conditions?
As we continue to explore the depths of the human mind and its complexities, the ancient symbols of psi and nu remind us that our quest for knowledge is both an inheritance and a continuation of a far-reaching journey begun by our ancestors. Anaxagoras, born about 500 BC, is the first person who is definitely known to have explained the concept of a nous, mind, which arranged all other things in the cosmos in their proper order, started them in a rotating motion, and continuing to control them to some extent, having an especially strong connection with living things. However, Aristotle reports an earlier philosopher, Hermotimus of Clazomenae, who had taken a similar position. Amongst the pre-Socratic philosophers before Anaxagoras, other philosophers had proposed a similar ordering human-like principle causing life and the rotation of the heavens. For example, Empedocles, like Hesiod much earlier, described cosmic order and living things as caused by a cosmic version of love, and Pythagoras and Heraclitus attributed the cosmos with reason or logos. According to Anaxagoras, the cosmos is made of infinitely divisible matter, every bit of which can inherently become anything except mind or nous, which is also matter, but which can only be found separated from this general mixture, or else mixed into living things, or in other words in the Greek terminology of the time, things with a soul or psyche.
Enter philosopher-turned-psychologist William James, who sought to explain the function rather than the structure of conscious components.
And James, more than anyone else, I think, creates the modern psychology that I call the two-headed dog. On the one hand, William James wants psychology to act as if it is a natural science and use the methods of natural science to make great headway into the processes that underlie human actions and thinking. On the other hand, William James wanted psychology to be a very applied, functional science. And the main principle of positivistic science in the 20th century was the goal is to observe, describe, predict, and ultimately control human behavior.
Anaxagoras wrote, "All other things partake in a portion of everything, while nous is infinite and self-ruled, and is mixed with nothing, but is alone, itself by itself. For if it were not by itself, but were mixed with anything else, it would partake in all things if it were mixed with any. For in everything there is a portion of everything, as has been said by me in what goes before, and the things mixed with it would hinder it, so that it would have power over nothing in the same way that it has now being alone by itself. For it is the thinnest of all things and the purest, and it has all knowledge about everything and the greatest strength. And nous has power over all things, both greater and smaller, that have soul, psyche."
Connecting sensory stimuli through conscious recognition to behavior was a great leap forward, a notion seized upon by American psychologist John Watson, who founded a new school of psychology called behaviorism. In behaviorism, psychology had found a method people could understand and relate to. Psychology, said Watson, is a purely objective experimental branch of natural science. Its theoretical goal is the prediction and control of behavior. The time has come when psychology must discard all reference to consciousness, when it no longer delude itself into thinking that it is making mental states the object of observation.
In the narrative of psychology, ancient wisdom and modern science converge, proving that our pursuit of understanding the human mind is as timeless as the symbols that represent it. As in Xenophon, Plato's Socratic view frequently describes the soul in a political way, with ruling parts, and parts that are by nature meant to be ruled. Nous is associated with the rational, logistican, part of the individual human soul, which by nature should rule. In his Republic, in the so-called analogy of the divided line, it has a special function within this rational part. Plato tended to treat nous as the only immortal part of the soul. As in Xenophon, Plato's Socratic view frequently describes the soul in a political way, with ruling parts, and parts that are by nature meant to be ruled. Nous is associated with the rational or the logistican part of the individual human soul, which by nature should rule. In his Republic, in the so-called analogy of the divided line, it has a special function within this rational part. Plato tended to treat nous as the only immortal part of the soul. Concerning the cosmos, in the Timaeus, the title character also tells a likely story, in which nous is responsible for the creative work of the demiurge or maker who brought rational order to our universe. This craftsman imitated what he perceived in the world of eternal forms. In the Philebus, Socrates argues that nous and individual humans must share in a cosmic nous, in the same way that human bodies are made up of small parts of the elements found in the rest of the universe. And this nous must be in the genos of being a cause of all particular things as particular things. Like Plato, Aristotle saw the nous or intellect of an individual as somehow similar to sense perception, but also distinct. Sense perception in action provides images to the nous via the sensus communis and imagination, without which thought could not occur. But other animals have sensus communis and imagination, whereas none of them have nous. Aristotelians divide perception of forms into the animal-like, one which perceives species sensibilis or sensible forms, and species intelligibilis that are perceived in a different way by the nous. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Book 6, Aristotle divides the soul or psyche into two parts, one which has reason and one which does not, but then divides the part which has reason into the reasoning or logistikos part itself, which is lower, and the higher knowing or epistemenikos part which contemplates general principles known as archai. Nous, he states, is the source of the first principles or sources called archai of definitions, and it develops naturally as people gain experience. This he explains after first comparing the four other truth-revealing capacities of soul: technical know-how or techne, logically deduced knowledge called episteme, sometimes translated as scientific knowledge, practical wisdom or phronesis, and lastly theoretical wisdom called Sophia, which is defined by Aristotle as the combination of nous and episteme. All of these others apart from nous are types of reason or logos.
Watson was the ultimate radical behaviorist who wanted to expunge mind from the psychology vernacular altogether. That mind was nothing more than you talking to yourself without having your lips move. And J.B., in his own way, did a couple of classic Watsonian-type studies where he attempts to demonstrate that, in fact, what you have, what you're calling mind, what you're calling mental activity, is really nothing more than a behavior. You are using language and you're talking to yourself. So when you say, I am thinking about something,
What?
the radical behaviorist is going to tell you, no, you're not. You're talking to yourself. And I can measure language, you see. It's something that is observable and objectifiable. But I can't measure your mind.
According to Aristotle, intellect, or the nous, is directed at what is ultimate on both sides, since it is intellect and not reason or the logos, that is directed at both the first terms, horoi, and the ultimate particulars, on the one side at the changeless first terms and demonstrations, and on the other side in thinking about action, at the other sort of premise, the variable particular. For these particulars are the sources or the archai, from which one discerns that for the sake of which an action is, since the universals are derived from the particulars. Hence intellect is both a beginning and an end, since the demonstrations that are derived from these particulars are also about these. And of these one must have perception, and this perception is intellect.
Mind.
Watson eventually applied his knowledge of human behavior to marketing products and achieved success as an advertising executive with J. Walter Thompson, marketing personal care products such as Pond's cold cream. Though Watson's behaviorist manifesto laid the groundwork, behaviorism's most famous proponent was Burrhus Frederick Skinner, better known as B.F. Skinner, whose radical behaviorism became the predominant view in psychology for several decades. Skinner felt all behavior is determined by external stimuli, to which an individual simply reacts. Over
The nous,
time,
usually translated as intellect or intelligence in this context, or sometimes mind or reason, is described as God, or more precisely an image of God. It thinks its own contents, which are thoughts, equated to the Platonic ideas or forms called id. The thinking of this intellect is the highest activity of life. The actualization, energia, of this thinking is the being of the forms. This intellect is the first principle or foundation of existence. The one is prior to it, but not in the sense that a normal cause is prior to an effect, but instead intellect is called an emanation of the one. The one is the possibility of this foundation of existence. Greek philosophy had an influence on the major religions that defined the Middle Ages, and one aspect of this was the concept of nous. Gnosticism was a late classical movement that incorporated ideas inspired by Neoplatonism and Neo-Pythagoreanism, but which was more a syncretic religious movement than an accepted philosophical movement. In Valentinianism, nous is the first male aeon. Together with his conjugate female aeon, aletheia, truth, he emanates from the propator bythos or forefather depths, and his coeternal enoia, meaning thought, or psyche, meaning silence. And these four form the primordial tetrad. The Ophites held that the demiurge Ialdabaoth, after coming into conflict with the archons he created a son, Ophiomorphus, who is called the serpent-formed nous. A similar conception of nous appears in the later teaching of the Basilidians, according to which he is the first begotten of the unbegotten Father, and himself the parent of Logos, from whom emanate successively phronesis, Sophia, and dunamis. But in this teaching, nous is identified with Christ, is named Jesus, is sent to save those that believe, and returns to him who sent him, after a passion which is apparent only, Simon of Cyrene being substituted for him on the cross.
over time, these reactions modify behavior, according to a principle Skinner termed operant behavior. Organisms tend to repeat responses that lead to positive outcomes, and they tend not to repeat responses that lead to neutral or negative outcomes. Skinner proved his theory on rats and pigeons, whose simple actions were positively rewarded with a food pellet or punished by an electrical shock, thus reinforcing the behavior. Skinner felt that thinking was superfluous and that free will was an illusion.
It is probable, however, that nous had a place in the original system of Basilides himself. For his Ogdoad, the great archon of the universe, the ineffable, is apparently made up of the 5 members named by Irenaeus, as above, together with 2 whom we find in Clement of Alexandria, Dicaesyne and Irene, added to the originating father. The antecedent of these systems is that of Simon, of whose 6 roots, emanating from the unbegotten fire, nous is first. The correspondence of these roots with the first 6 aeons that Valentinus derives from Bythos is noted by Hippolytus. Simon says in his Apophysis Megal, there are 2 offshoots of the entire ages, having neither beginning nor end. Of these the one appears from above, the great power, the nous of the universe, administering all things, male. The other from beneath, the great epinoia, female, bringing forth all things. To nous and epinoia correspond heaven and earth, in the list given by Simon of the 6 material counterparts of his 6 emanations. The identity of this list with the 6 material objects alleged by Herodotus to be worshipped by the Persians, together with the supreme place given by Simon to fire as the primordial power, leads us to look to Iran for the origin of these systems in one aspect. In another, they connect themselves with the teaching of Pythagoras and of Plato. According to the Gospel of Mary, Jesus himself articulates the essence of nous. There where is the nous, lies the treasure. Then I said to him, Lord, when someone meets you in a moment of vision, is it through the soul or psyche that they see, or is it through the spirit or pneuma? The teacher answered, it is neither through the soul nor the spirit, but the nous between the two which sees the vision. In Mandaic, manna has been variously translated as mind, nous, or treasure. The Mandean formula, I am a manna of the great life, is a phrase often found in the numerous hymns of Book 2 of the Left Ginza.
So when you tell me that you have free will as a scientist, I'm going to ask you what you mean by that, and I'm going to trace your concept of free will back to some event or some mechanism, that's probably a better word, that will explain why you feel that you have free will, when in fact you must live, if you're a scientist, in a deterministic universe.
Parallel to the rise
The Christian New Testament makes mention of the nous or noos, generally translated in modern English as mind, but also showing a link to God's will or law. In Romans 7 verse 23, nous refers to the law or nomos of God, which is the law, as opposed to the law of sin which is in the body. In Romans 12 verse 2, it demands Christians should not conform to this world, but continuously be transformed by the renewing of their nous or mind, so as to be able to determine what God's will is. According to 1 Corinthians 14:14 to 14:19, it discusses speaking in tongues, and says that a person who speaks in tongues that they cannot understand and should prefer to also have understanding or nous, and it is better for the listeners also to be able to understand. And in Ephesians 4:17 to 4:23, it discusses how non-Christians have a worthless nous or, while Christians should seek to renew the spirit or pneuma of their nous or mind. And in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 2, it uses the term to refer to being troubled of mind. Finally, in Revelation 17 verse 9, here is the nous which has wisdom. In the writings of the Christian fathers, a sound or pure nous is considered essential to the cultivation of sound wisdom.
Rise of behaviorism in the United States, the German Gestalt psychologists accepted the notion of consciousness, but opposed attempts to reduce consciousness to elements of its structure or function.
But Gestalt theory, or Gestalt psychology, was a phenomenological approach, meaning that looking at behavior in the kind of microscopic ways, molecular ways that psychologists were doing at the time, stimulus-response relationships, introspectively looking at elemental analyses of behavior. Gestalt psychologists thought you ought to look at behavior as it occurs, experience as it occurs. So that if I look out the window from Titchener's point of view and trying to describe the basic sensations that would make up my perception, I would say I see hues and shapes and textures and contours, and that later, maybe even milliseconds later, my brain says to me that these are cars and trees and buildings and other things out there.
Augustine used Neoplatonism selectively. He used both the Neoplatonic nous and the Platonic form of the good, or the idea of the good, as equivalent terms for the Christian God, or at least for one particular aspect of God. For example, God, nous, can act directly upon matter, and not only through souls, and concerning the souls through which it works upon the world experienced by humanity, some are treated as angels. The human nous in Eastern Orthodox Christianity is the eye of the heart or soul, or the mind of the heart. The soul of man is created by God in his image. Man's soul is intelligent and noetic, meaning I see or understand. Saint Thalassius of Syria wrote that God created beings with the capacity to receive the Spirit and to attain knowledge of himself. He has brought into existence the senses and sensory perception to serve such beings. Eastern Orthodox Christians hold that God did this by creating mankind with intelligence and noetic faculties. The operation of faith being the means of free will by which mankind faces the future or unknown, these noetic operations contained in the concept of insight or noesis. In Eastern Christianity, it is by faith or intuitive truth that this component of an object's existence is grasped. Faith, pistis, is therefore sometimes used interchangeably with noesis in Eastern Christianity. Angels have intelligence and nous, whereas men have reason, both logos and dianoia, nous and sensory perception. This follows the idea that man is a microcosm and an expression of the whole creation or macrocosmos. The human nous was darkened after the fall of man, which was the result of the rebellion of reason against the nous, but after the purification, healing, or correction of the nous, achieved through ascetic practices like hesychasm, the human nous, the eye of the heart, will see God's uncreated light and feel God's uncreated love and beauty, at which point the nous will start the unceasing prayer of the heart and become illuminated, allowing the person to become an orthodox theologian. Man's nous, word, and spirit are not hypostases or individual existences or realities, but activities or energies of the soul, whereas in the case with God or the persons of the Holy Trinity, each are indeed hypostases. So these three components of each individual man are inseparable from one another, but they do not have a personal character when in speaking of the being or ontology that is mankind. The nous as the eye of the soul, which some fathers also call the heart, is the center of man and is where true, spiritual, knowledge is validated. This is seen as true knowledge which is implanted in the nous as always coexisting with it. This insight underscores the deep historical roots and symbolic significance of psychology, connecting ancient philosophical inquiries with modern scientific exploration.
And the Gestalt psychologists thought that was a very artificial approach to psychology, and they argued that no, when you look out the window you see cars and trees and buildings, and that's the basis of the experience.
Another way to illustrate the Gestalt point of view is embodied in the notion of what they termed a figure ground, which formed a basis for where one placed their attention during the act of perceiving.
There's something that becomes the focus of your attention, and that we call the figure, and whatever else is there then becomes ground against which that figure is imposed, but will not attract much of our attention. And the most famous example of that, which came again out of the Gestalt school, was the faces vase illusion, as is sometimes described. So if you see the white, let's say the faces are done in black, then the vase appears in the middle of the picture in white, and that means that the white is the figure and the black is ground. But if you see the black as figure with the white as background, then you see these two faces facing each other, and it all depends on which one you focus on.
As we draw to a close on our exploration of the noological origins of psychology, we reflect on a journey that stretches from the ancient sands of Egypt and Greece to the cutting-edge laboratories of today. The enduring symbols of psi and nu have guided us through a labyrinth of thought, theory, and therapeutic practice, revealing the profound connections between ancient philosophies and contemporary
In
psychological
the
science.
1950s, Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, and the other humanists challenged Skinner's deterministic point of view, saying men were not animalistic stimulus-response creatures, rather that humans have free will and their behavior stems from an individual's sense of self or self-concept, which motivated people toward personal growth. Maslow's pyramid of needs clearly depicts the human progression of motivation, beginning with basic needs of food, shelter, and clothing, ascending toward the ultimate human need of self-actualization.
And then this issue
In the threads of history, we see the of human understanding, where each stitch represents a step towards greater knowledge of the human mind. The ancients embarked on this quest with tools of philosophy and mysticism, paving the way for today's psychologists, who continue to explore and expand these foundational insights using modern technology and scientific methodology. The legacy of the ancients isn't just found in books or symbols. It's alive in every hypothesis we formulate, every therapy session we conduct, and in the very way we conceive of mental health and healing. This information has not merely been a historical account, but a bridge connecting disparate eras united by a common quest: understanding the human mind. From the philosophical musings over the psyche to modern neuropsychology's intricate mappings of the brain, we witness a seamless continuum of discovery and enlightenment.
The issue comes to what I consider to be a flashpoint in the middle of the 20th century in the great debates between Carl Rogers and B.F. Skinner, between the hard-headed scientist who wants psychology to be the scientific study of behavior, and the humanist Carl Rogers, who's interested really and truly more or less in not controlling human behavior, but in accentuating and optimizing humanity. B.F. Skinner still arguing that whether you call it cognition, whether you call it thinking, whether you call it mental events, you're still searching for some sort of ghost inside the machine, rather than focusing on the mechanical observations of the organism's behavior. And he's making the argument that just as personality might be a construct, so is the term cognitive science.
Noology, then, is more than just an ancient concept or a field of study. It is a beacon that has, across millennia, illuminated paths to self-discovery and mental health. It encourages us to think deeply, question continuously, and integrate diverse perspectives to harness a fuller understanding of ourselves and our place within the cosmos. As we continue to navigate the complex world of mental processes and behaviors, let us carry forward the spirit of inquiry and respect for knowledge that was as vital to the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Atlanteans as it is to us today. In doing so, we honor those who laid the early stones of this dynamic discipline and ensure that the bridge between the old and the new remains strong and vibrant.
The history of cognitive psychology cannot be complete without mentioning the contributions of Viennese neurologist Sigmund Freud, who sought to discover unconscious determinants of behavior through a process of talking therapy he termed psychoanalysis. Freud saw the mind, or psyche, as organized into three interrelated forces: ego, the motivating self-concept; id, the pleasure-seeking, selfish source of personal satisfaction; and superego, one's conscience or moral compass. Working together, these three forces explain behavior, personality, motivation, and even abnormal behavior.
The so-called early modern philosophers of Western Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries established arguments which led to the establishment of modern science as a methodical approach to improve the welfare of humanity by learning to control nature. As such, speculation about metaphysics, which cannot be used for anything practical, and which can never be confirmed against the reality we experience, started to be deliberately avoided, especially according to the so-called empiricist arguments of philosophers such as Bacon, Hobbes, Locke, and Hume.
It's interesting that most people, when you say the word psychology, the first name that comes to mind is not Carl Rogers, it is not B.F. Skinner, it is Sigmund Freud, because Freud had such a profound impact on the course of Western civilization's thinking. He was part of it, and he also helped guide and direct and create the idea of mental activities, the idea of the unconscious, that the average citizen comes to say, I can understand that.
Thank you for joining us as we journey through the noological origins of psychology, where ancient symbols guide us and modern minds continue to explore the deepest questions of existence. The journey of understanding continues, and like the ancients, we continue to seek, to learn, and to grow.
Because I can't explain it.
In 1967, Ulrich Neisser published his landmark book, Cognitive Psychology, which opened the door to a new way of thinking about thinking, and that human behavior cannot be properly understood without carefully analyzing the information perceived by an organism.
How one knows the world depends on what you bring to the world to interpret it. There is no direct world.
In the Aristotelian scheme, nous is the basic understanding or awareness that allows human beings to think rationally. For Aristotle, this was distinct from the processing of sensory perception, including the use of imagination and memory, which other animals can do. For him, then, discussion of nous is connected to discussion of how the human mind sets definitions in a consistent and communicable way, and whether people must be born with some innate potential to understand the same universal categories in the same logical ways. Derived from this, it was also sometimes argued, in classical and medieval philosophy, that the individual nous must require help of a spiritual and divine type. By this type of account, it also came to be argued that the human understanding, nous, somehow stems from this cosmic nous, which is, however, not just a recipient of order, but a creator of it. Such explanations were influential in the development of medieval accounts of God, the immortality of the soul, and even the motions of the stars in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, amongst both eclectic philosophers and authors representing all the major faiths of their times.
The world is always something that one constructs, and one constructs it in a fashion that not only satisfies one's needs, but makes one get on with other people along the way. You have to somehow get information, you organize the information, and you transform it to suit the needs of what it is that you're involved on, and that's cognitive psychology.
How this new information is incorporated within existing cognitive schema, or mental framework by which knowledge is organized, draws from Jean Piaget's stage theory of development. When new information is perceived, the organism either assimilates it as is within existing mental structures, or changes existing mental structures to accommodate the new information, either way producing growth. In this way, people are continuously involved in constructing and deconstructing their visions of themselves and the greater world.
There are no meanings that are given to you by the world. Meaning making as such is the central human activity. We construct our worlds. We each have different ones. We learn how somehow to get along with. And it's the process of constructing reality, constructing meaning making. It's the construction of meaning that is so critical, where culture comes into the thing to such a degree.
Culture is usually defined by social scientists as shared attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors which characterize a particular psychosocial group.
Ordinariness constitutes the culture, and in order for them to live with other people, they've got to share ordinariness. So in the process of doing so, they can't work in terms of the absolute diversity of the world. They've got to work in terms of categories, for example. Categories of things. There are things that are good, there are things that are bad, there are things that have authority, there are things that don't have.
Now, by emphasizing the ongoing nature of psychological inquiry and the integral connection between ancient wisdom and modern scientific approaches, we hope this is encouraging viewers to appreciate the depth and breadth of psychological science. Never believe, check it out.